the darker parts of the globe are struggling to become more independent of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the whole complex that Bucky Fuller calls MMAO, Machiavelli, Mafia, Atoms, and Oil. As a matter of fact, Michio Kaku, the physicist, he said he quit working for the government when he discovered that most of the Star Wars technology was aimed at third world countries and not at the Soviet Union at all. That the United States already figured they had the Soviet Union buffalo even before the Cold War ended. They were getting ready for wars with the Southern Hemisphere, which would be purely imperialistic wars, although of course the mass media will never admit it. It'll always be a war for freedom and God and the American way and apple pie and good old mom. But basically they're all wars to maintain the power of the major corporations and banks.
So the story of the 20th century continues.
Yeah, but as Asia and Africa come online, I see a global brain forming. I didn't invent that metaphor. It's been used by quite a few people. I think as information travels faster and faster and more in more and more directions, that we're going to develop a global system, not necessarily a world government, but some kind of a world governance, let's say, a confederation of some sort, where everybody will be fairly equally represented. I know it sounds utopian, but hell, the Constitution sounded utopian, and it worked for a while. I think the European and Canadian and most of the civilized world, I think most of them have gone a long way down the path I think we have to go in order to have a peaceful and prosperous planet. I think you find more of the United States Constitution alive in Europe and Canada than you do in the United States right now. But I think the United States will eventually rediscover the Constitution. It does exist. You can find it in the back of the dictionary. The Tsar hasn't ordered it taken out of the dictionaries yet. Well, that might be the next step. I would say the Scandinavian countries please me more than any others on the planet right now. And France and Germany are moving more and more on that. So even Portugal is moving in that direction. Hell, they legalized abortion in Spain. I think they just legalized marijuana in Portugal. The world is moving toward a saner system, but I think the United States will be the last one to move because the power groups here are so entrenched and so committed to a very reactionary philosophy.
But do you think that the United States as the center, more or less, of the Internet will reap any of those benefits before other countries?
Oh yeah, to some extent. I think the growing skepticism about the government, which, as I pointed out in my book, Everything is Under Control, around 75% of the population doesn't trust the government anymore. I used to feel like a lone eccentric in distrusting the government. Now it turns out I'm part of the majority. 75% of the population doesn't trust the government. I think that's chiefly due to Internet. Because on the Internet you get hundreds of different viewpoints, whereas in the corporate media you only get one viewpoint. Or you cover the whole spectrum, as Noam Chomsky likes to say. They give you the whole spectrum from far right to middle of the road, so you feel you're getting a variety. That's the newspapers. TV doesn't even go that far. They only give you one viewpoint, the far right.
Yeah, I noticed that particular statistic, that it's a 1996 survey showing 3 out of 4 Americans believe the government is basically constantly involved in nefarious activities and conspiracies. You think the Internet has caused this change?
Well, yeah, mostly, I think, yeah. I mean, the most outrageous charges against the government can be found on Internet. They seldom get into the major media. There was a reporter on the San Jose Mercury News who did a series of articles on the CIA's involvement in the cocaine business, about which there's been at least a dozen books already. And a week later, the San Jose Mercury News printed an editorial saying the stories were inaccurate, and they fired him. He has since written another book about the subject, adding to the vastly growing library about the CIA and cocaine. and he goes around lecturing about it. And I've read a lot of these books. If I was on the jury, I'd vote guilty if the CIA were on trial as a major coke dealer. But you can't get it into the major media.
So this is an example of a conspiracy theory that is still up in the air in terms of the verdict, but you actually believe it to be real and true.
Like I said, if I were on the jury, I'd vote guilty, knowing what I know now. Of course, if I were on the jury, I'd have to listen to the case for the defense, too, and I might change my mind.
Still, conspiracy theory seems to be the thing that you're best known for.
Alas.
How is it that conspiracy theory intrigues you so much?
Well, it's like internet. It forces you to consider alternatives. Well, if you have a book by a conspiracy theorist and accept it as the holy writ, you can spend the rest of your life spreading that conspiracy theory and annoying everybody who doesn't believe it and pounding on the table. But by God, look at this document right here and all that stuff. But by and large, on internet, if you go into alt.conspiracy, you'll find 80 different conspiracy theories fighting it out among one another, and you're forced to start thinking, do any of these make any sense? Is there one that makes more sense than the others? Are some of them partly true, some of them mostly false? You got to start thinking in non-Aristotelian categories, not just quick true, false, but how much of this is true? Like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which was a bestseller about 20 years ago. I was really shocked when a friend of mine said he found 3 things in it that weren't true, so he knew the whole book was a hoax. My attitude towards that book is like my attitude towards everything else. How much of it is true? Now, is it true? Is it all true? Is it all false? That seems like childish questions to me. The question is how much of it can be proven to be true and how much of it is just guesswork or bluff by the authors. It's about the priory of science. An affinity group or conspiracy, whichever words you prefer, of French aristocrats and bankers. Such an organization does exist. Whether their explanation of what this organization is up to is true or false, that I think is debatable. But I think they prove the organization.